Bienvenue à la Vive L'Empreur. I am Michael Odin, your host, and this is my co-host Aldous, who is going to be taking the show by storm today as we are finally doing our Battle of the Pyramids episode. I am going to be pretty quiet here today because I am going to be bringing up the learning aids, all of Aldus's images and maps, and he will yell at me when I do it wrong.
I'll
Otherwise,
just
I will
yell
be
at you
keeping.
anyway. That's usually how
That's
this
fair. That's
goes.
that's kind of how that goes in this show. So, uh, but anyways, so other than that, I'll be keeping up with the chat this evening. So y'all know what that means. Time for some gatekeeping, and yeah, let's rock.
Awesome, man. So when we last left off, the French had landed in Egypt. They had successfully secured and taken Alexandria, and now they want to wait. They want to take the safe passage down the Nile. All of his advisors are saying that he needs to take his time, and because we got to sort out the logistics. And the same as we saw with the siege of Alexandria, Napoleon's like, no, we're going to march straight across the desert. We're going to go right for their throat. We're going to take Cairo. And so they march across the desert. And so it's July 20th, 1798. And just a minute, where did I go? Okay, my screen's all messed up for some odd reason. I blame Odin.
That's fair. All things are my fault on this show. So
Yes. All right, so I appear to have that all sorted out now. All right, so it's July 20th, 1798, which was an abnormally hot day, and the French forced march across the sands of Egypt, the same sands that Alexander had walked. Right, this is the same locale. And hearkening back, what was Napoleon talking about? He's like, we are going to walk in the shadow of Alexander. We are going to be just like him. We are going to liberate this land and do it in the name of France. So a forced march brings the French army to Napoleon's chosen ground faster than even his most ardent advisors had thought possible, right? Napoleon had promised glory to his men, that the quill was wet with ink to write their names down in the annals of history for all to remember. Glory be to France, but more importantly, glory be unto you because you are a free man. So the French army is sitting there. They rest for 60 minutes before they form back up after a forced march the previous day. The gilded sun is glimmering down on bayonet tips as they form up, just as it had the phalanx of pikes centuries earlier. And in that cavalcade of calm that always seems to cast over the clash before men, the morning is quiet. The sand blows lightly in the wind. It seems to cry out for blood to be spilled upon its endless sea. Alexander had earned this desert in blood, and so would Napoleon. Wool uniforms on the French made the sweltering heat even worse, but it was trivial to the men serving, for they believed Napoleon's promises of glory, and up till now they had shown that he was no liar. Those who could not have tolerated these harsh conditions had already fallen on the forced march from earlier that day. No stops for water or rest. Just move, move, move. Heads were held high. Not by the leather chokers that the British used on their soldiers. Oh no, these were men of France and free. Their backs were not buckled by tyranny, nor their shoulders bowed by the burdens of a king. Only France they served and each other, and they served under Napoleon. 17,000 French infantry and 3,000 cavalry stood in fine order that morning, having only that single hour of rest from the forced march on the 20th. Against them stands a horde of Mamelukes that stretched as far as the eye could see, 30 to 50,000 infantry and well over 6,500 cavalry, some on horseback, some on camels. These hordes had controlled Egypt for centuries and were rightly feared by all who faced them, but the French stood, knowing that day would be theirs despite being outnumbered almost 3-1. This sight was one to behold for any soldier. But these were no average soldiers. These were Frenchmen. They were free, invigorated by the spirit of liberté, and they were here for the glory of France itself. And again, they viewed themselves walking in the feet of the West, of the conquerors of lore, of Alexander himself. But the battle was not known at this time, or even prepped at this time, as the Battle of the Pyramids. The closest village was Mbabe, And it was to be known as the Battle of Mbabwe until shortly after the battle, when Napoleon did what he always did and promoted himself exceptionally well. So the village of Mbabwe, if you want to pull up one of the maps,
Yeah.
that was kind of a hint when I ring off a historical location. You might want to pull
Oh,
up the
okay.
map.
I'm sorry. Pulling up the map.
So you can't really see it, but the village of Mbabwe is down there in the corner.
Right here. I got it right here.
Yep, there we go. So it's the Battle of Mbabwe. It's just across the Nile River from where both armies stood. The Great Pyramids are within view. They're about 9 miles away. So for now, the sand and the sun and the soldiers, they don't care about that. All that they have is the now, right? So the table was set. The master of his force of French courage and stalwart action rode forth, haphazardly, on his horse, because he was an artilleryman by trade and school. Riding was never his forte, and he wasn't comfortable in the saddle. And he issued his order of the day. And his order for the day to the entire army was, "Soldiers, you came to this country to save the inhabitants from barbarism, to bring civilization to the Orient, and subtract this beautiful part of the world from the domain of England. From the top of those pyramids, 40 centuries are contemplating you." Again, he's echoing that haunting back. If you are walking in the shadow of giants, and we will accomplish this in their name. The French started to advance, slowly, disciplined, and in full order. The alterations to the French deployment methodology that had been discussed prior to the revolution, heresy to the establishment, had now been fully embraced post-revolution with the Directory. And Napoleon was already beginning to implement the corps system that had first become its nascent form 20 years before. It's not fully developed yet, but the command and control is there. Trusted men, educated men, not nobles who had purchased their commissions or were handed it due to some surname obligation, stood around him. These were men that he trusted, men that he had handpicked for the most part. Names of some of these men would carry elan into the hearts of those that served beneath them for years to come. Louis Desaix, Louis Ban, and Jean Renier. 5 divisions stood ready, each organized in square formations. Something unheard of at the divisional level. And at the corner of each square, they had placed their artillery. In the center, the baggage and the battalions of cavalry. The horn signal was blown, the runners sent. Signal flags indicated the order. Advance, advance, advance. Shifting forward in echelon formation, the French moved. And at first, with the left holding tight against the Nile, the right began to swing out a little bit. And as that right flank led the motion, with that left holding tight, the azure waters of the Nile stood still, almost as if a ribbon of the sky had been torn asunder and laid across the desert. And with a nod and an order to a runner, he issued the order for Desaix's division to advance. And ever the dutiful soldier of France, Desaix did as instructed. His abilities never in doubt, and thus that was the reason Napoleon had placed him in the center. And he advanced his division in square formation slowly and in full order, again, almost unheard of, slowly towards the Mameluke center. And this was where the action spurned the anxious and bloodthirsty Ayoub Bey, one half of the ruling duelers of the Mamelukes, to act. Up until now there had been minor skirmishes, 2 or 3 villages had been taken, but this was the call to action. 3:30 p.m., the sun's at its absolute peak, and legends are about to be born in the sands of Egypt. So what happens? Well, first let's talk a little bit about what the Mamelukes are. Like I said, they have over 40,000 men in just infantry. But it's not quality infantry. It's more ragtag, indentured servants, militia, mercenaries. That's not who Ayoub Bey and the Mamelukes are counting on. They're counting on their 6,500 cavalry. And this is, by European standards, light cavalry, lancers, light dragoons, nothing comes to a close of a cuirassier or like a true medium lancer. It's light cavalry and a mix of horses and camels, but this cavalry has been absolutely devastating to any army that has ever faced them in Europe. For centuries, the Mamelukes have been completely tight in their grip and control of all of Egypt. Even the British, dare not really mess with them. They just have loose agreements for trade. So Mayur Bey is on one side of the bank, Ayub Bey is on the other. These are the two men that kind of rule the Mamelukes, and rules loosely. It's just a loose confederation. They all report to the Sultan, and as long as everything's fine and dandy and the Sultan gets his money and the Ottoman Empire, they really don't look too much at Egypt. So as this cavalry wave begins to commence towards the squares, the French don't fire. They hold their fire. They hold their fire. They hold their fire till they're almost right on top of them, and then this brutal opening salvo of musket fire and cannonade just devastates the Mamluks. And they're not ready for it. They've never seen anything like it. Infantry has always broke before any charge they do, but they are facing for the first time the divisional square. The divisional square is 4 battalions, each side. There's no flank for the cavalry to wrap around. There's no break in the line. All they're met with is musket fire and a wall of bayonets if they get close enough, with cannons at the corners pounding out grape shot over and over and over again. As the cavalry pulls back, the Mamelukes are in disorder. They pull back, and now the French cavalry is released out upon them, and breaks open up within the square, and the cavalry surges out and sorties out, slaughters them a little bit, and then retreats back within the square. And the Mamelukes would do this again and again and again, and not once did they ever waver or break. The French square stood, offering nothing but death to the Mamelukes. And by 5:30, 2 hours, 6 o'clock at the latest, 2.5 hours, it's over. The Mamluk army is in almost full retreat. The French suffer less than 300 casualties. And you have one of easily the greatest victories in Napoleon's career, in summation. And we can start going over some specifics, but that's the general story of the Battle of the Pyramids. Is it grand? Is it grand tactical? Are there epic moments of leadership? No. It's a wall of mass of Mamluk cavalry just slaughtering themselves up against a brilliant defensive display of something that had never been done before. And that's the divisional square. Because not only were these divisional squares, again, they're usually a static formation. Nobody advanced in square, let alone at a division level. But again, because of that core, the early implementations of that core command and control, the French army is moving like a machine. Everybody's issuing their orders. Everybody knows what to do. Everybody is competent, which is something at this time that is shocking to everybody other than the Prussians in Europe. You don't see this level of discipline, especially in an arguably citizenary force like Napoleon has here in Egypt. And so, like I said, the French suffer less than 300 casualties. The order of magnitude of the casualties on the Mamluk force is questionable and in doubt. There are French accounts that they suffered 15,000 to 20,000 dead. Most accounts put them at anywhere from 8 to 12,000 dead. But either way, this is far and away the greatest lopsided victory in Napoleon's history. It's just absolutely brutal what he does to the Mamluk army here. Both the Beys would end up retreating. The next day, Napoleon takes Cairo, basically just walks right into the city. But the Beys would remain a problem and a thorn in his side, basically as a guerrilla force, causing nothing but trouble for his baggage trains and his outward positions, pretty much for the remainder of the campaign, for the most part, especially when they go into Syria later. But this is the absolute pinnacle. This couldn't have gone any better for the French, and Napoleon utilizes that for to raise his name, but also to celebrate the glory that is France. And so it's not the Battle of Ndembe, because who knows where Ndembe is, but everybody knows where the pyramids are. And so in painting after painting that are commissioned, in story after story, they fought in the shadows of the pyramids. And that's why in that god-awful trailer we watched last week, you had cannonballs hitting the goddamn.
And this was why we showed Aldous that trailer. Anyways, before we get any further into all the details, because I know Aldous has prepped a whole bunch. This is a really exciting show. And thanks for that very stirring introduction there, Aldous. This is a really great way to introduce the chat to the Battle of the Pyramids. But speaking of the chat, we have been joined by people. We actually have people in the chat tonight. So, obviously, first of the chat was Snuggy Jr. Thanks so much. His family is watching Mannequin, also Egypt themed. So I probably responded that we appreciate you having your priorities in order. Who needs fam when you have Napoleon Bonaparte? Um, a, a very good thing indeed. Um, we also have been joined by comics mate Dean James, my co-creator on the Embrace, um, and
And president of the Bill Finger Appreciation Society.
and president of the Bill Finger Appreciation Society.
In contrast to your own presidencyship of the Bob Behemoth
The
Zeros
Bob,
of Champagne.
yes. Crazy Mad has joined as well. He's given some hailing to the chat. Comics Mate is a bit confused about where Egypt is. I mean, I guess geography can be confusing when you're upside down in Australia, so I can't hold it too hard against him.
Yeah. Well, I think he's reading Egypt as felt gypped, which would be Italy. You're thinking of Italy.
Snuggy Jr. informs him, no, Dean, the pyramids are in Vegas.
There's actually one in Paris, too.
Yeah.
At the Louvre.
It's all made of glass, though.
Yes. Well,
much more fragile.
Glass, sand, it's all the same, right?
Yeah, something
different
like
states
that.
of being.
Snuggy Jr. informs us that he believes that Marmaduke is a Great Dane. He
Mamaluk. M-A-M-L-U-K.
Yes,
and they're basically, I think we kind of went over this, but it's been a while. They're basically just bastards.
They've got a rap.
Mamluk means basically one who is owned or slave. They were primarily Turkish, Caucasian, Georgian, what we'd consider Georgian Slovak, Kurdish, Hungarian, Baltic. They were just basically anybody that the Ottomans had captured. If they raised a village and captured men, women, and children, they'd just throw them into this melting pot of people that they ruled with an iron fist. And over the centuries, they kind of just became their own group. And it's just this giant melting pot. It's a very brutal culture. And people would rise up to be kind of tribal chieftains and leaders. And there'd be inner conflicts, and they'd kill each other and for more and more power. And that's how the Beys arrived at their position. They were just two really, really powerful warlords and got to the point where they shared power, each kind of doing their own thing. And they just held reign over everybody else, and they created order. In a chaotic environment, they created order, and the Ottomans appreciated that, so they got the blessing of the Ottomans. But overall, the Ottoman Empire, really, they can't expend forces right now to do anything in Egypt. They're stretched thin as it is with stuff that's going on northeast and west from where their empire is. So
I'm sorry, Aldous.
It's fine.
Is marmalade made out of what
the jams, preserves, marmalade segment will be at the end of the episode, I believe.
Marmalade made fresh from the fields of the pyramids.
And really, this is kind of, I don't know, you can maybe argue with me on this, but I would say that Napoleon's invasion, and especially the Battle of the Pyramids, kind of is the beginning of the end of the Mamluk Empire, of whatever you want to call it as an empire. This is pretty much, I mean, in 20 years, they're gone as a rough society.
Yeah.
Well, so this is kind of their high water mark.
Yeah, like the Mamluks were, I believe, we covered this like months ago when we first talked about them. But they're kind of like a tribal society that, as you said, the Ottomans grant them the ability to rule over this territory because they're freaking mean sons of bitches.
Yeah, they're Bedouin nomads. I mean, it's the same culture that's been in that whole North Africa region really since the time of Moses. It's that same nomadic culture. It's just a little bit more organized because of the Ottoman Empire's influence and long reach of their arm that's kind of granting benefactor status to the Beys. But 100 years prior to this, Egypt is a total chaos zone. with warlords fighting each other. Now it's like I said, it's a little bit more structured and ordered. And this was a shock to the Ottomans that the Beys would be defeated this much because they don't normally have to worry about anything in Egypt. The Beys have been keeping everything in control, and now they've got a problem. And one of the first, again, Napoleon, right after he took Alexandria, the first thing he did was he sent a letter off to the Sultan saying, "Hey, I'm not here to mess with you. I'm just here to liberate Egypt." And that pissed the Sultan off. Well, not only has he pissed the Sultan off, he's dealt a devastating blow to essentially what is the auxiliary army of the Ottoman Empire that's stationed in Egypt. And again, most of that army is auxiliary. It's militia. Most of them didn't want to be there. They're undertrained. They'll run at the first shot. But that cavalry, that was 6,500 men. Those are nomads. Those are leaders. Those are chiefs. These are people that have fighting experience. They're veterans. The amount of dead and amount of loss they had there, that's really the crippling end of them. It was too big of a loss to bear. No different than if you move forward in history, 120 years, the devastating losses that some of the Cossack branches had in World War I between fighting the Germans and then turning for the Russian Civil War. It ended numerous tribes of Cossacks for the same reason. You just can't come back when you lose, 70% of a generation in a conflict.
And so, I'm going to bring up this map here because when you were talking and doing your breakdown, I think that you had talked a lot about the divisional square movement and how extraordinary and unique that was.
Well, actually, can you go back if you can go back to the other one that showed them in line? And then I'll explain, because I mentioned that they move in an echelon formation. So
okay,
if you can go back to the other one, we can show the initial layout, and then we can kind of go through the tactical moves that they did and then why they did them, because that's the secondary most brilliant thing. What Renaer and really Renaer's the big one, but between Renaer and Desailles, what they do is just impressive. So essentially they were set up in a line. If you kind of see where Desailles is, it was a straight line. And then when they move in echelon format, Desailles moves forward and the rest of the right moved in echelon. So they kind of swept down. So then if you can go back to the other one, and this is the center. So this isn't showing you the other two squares that are just north of that. I understand you don't have the actual maps right there at your fingertips.
Yeah, no, I've got to share. I have to share screen them, and because I have them open up as separate tabs on Chrome, it's not.
I sent them to him so you could save them and upload them to StreamYard.
Yeah.
I did all that prep work. All right, moving on.
I didn't know I could do that. That's brilliant. I should have. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, the tutorial will be in the after show.
It wouldn't be one of our shows if I didn't fuck up the technical specs in some way, shape, or form. If we had zero technical difficulties during our stream, we'd have to just stop doing the show because that's like a ill omen at this point.
That is true. All right, so that the whole what would be the upper portion of the French army advances in echelon. So you've got Bond's division holds place, right? They're the left flank of the military, of the army. So if you think of it as down on the screen, kind of from upper right to lower left, that's the French view. So if you're facing that way, Bond is on the left. He's the left flank, and he holds his position. He never moves. Everything else swings like a door and closes around him. And so Manu advanced a little bit, but he never really saw much actual engagement because there were some minor villages that they were engaging with, and that was earlier in the day. It was there were two small. Imba is it's a village, but there was kind of some fortifications, and there was a little bit of fighting there. But excuse me, that was earlier in it. But it was, what was the... Shoot, I gotta find it in my notes here. Sorry.
It's all good, man. In the meantime, Dean is giving us guff for not answering his questions about how marmalade was being made from Marmaduke secretes. So he said, this is exactly what it was like being in high school with me. I would ask questions about that. may or may not be relevant, and the teachers would ignore me. And we didn't ignore him. He got answers from his peers. So I let him know peer to peer interaction is equally vital to development.
Sure.
Snuggy puts up there, it's interesting to listen, but also fun to see if we can throw Aldous off with nonsense.
So okay, so the French advance, and this is their final position and where they end up. Like I said, Renier advances, or Desailles advances forward, and then Renier drops in behind him. And the reason he drops in behind him is, if you can imagine the waves of the Mamluk cavalry coming across these massive hordes, it's not organized cavalry; it's just a mass of horses riding forth. And as they hit Desailles Square, they split and they flow around it. Well, right after they flow around it and they start riding to get back together, they run right into Rennes Square. So if you can imagine those artillery pieces, each time they're within cannonade range, they're blasting apart. And this is where the command and control comes into place. Each square had its final position and Desailles sets the point, right? He advances out to a certain point that he knows is where he needs to be and stops. And then they know the ranges of their weapons, so now they're positioned such that, like, the rear rank of Desailles Square can fire a full shot, and it won't hit Renier. And Renier's side can fire a full shot, and it won't hit Desailles. And so they've got the Mamelukes in it's a turkey shoot. Because no matter which way they go, they're getting hit with something.
So,
and this happened again and again and again.
If you can confirm, is my cursor showing up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so in case it's hard to read for anybody in the chat, I can actually show it. So Desailles is this one here, more towards the center, and then just slightly back is Renier. And so, as you can see, as Aldous was talking about, they have their firearms angled in a position where none of them are in each other's field of fire, while creating what we would call the modern military a fatal funnel.
Yeah, kill zone.
Yeah, so effectively, what this does is, the Mamluk cavalry, their biggest advantage in this is obviously their mobility, and they have home field advantage. So they're going to be like running around here trying to outmaneuver and probe these formations for weak points. But in doing so, they're doing exactly what Renier and Desailles want them to do, and that's file through this fatal funnel and be caught between both sides, and then be peppered by shots as they go out. So they're just getting slaughtered.
So, and let's talk a little bit about what square formation was. Square, there was essentially there's four. There's four forms that infantry can take in Napoleonic warfare. There's march column, which is where you'd be 4 to 5 men wide, and then the rest of the army would be deep. And so that battalion would be marching in column, 5 men wide, and then the rest of it deep. And that's for road travel, path travel. That's a forced march position. Then you had double line, which was the French used explicitly, but the French were a little different than the French were very well disciplined, and they were the only army in Europe for this period of time that could form line on the march, which would mean they'd be marching at you in column, and the individual brigades and companies would start splitting off as they were still marching forward in column and form line on the move. If you ever want to get really interested in it, there are some British military advisors that witnessed what happened in Austria that we talked about very early on in this series. That it's like their heads exploded. They had never registered that was even something that was possible, because the British, the average British soldier was so poorly trained, they couldn't fathom an army, a full battalion having that level of discipline to do that and to be that well trained. It scared the hell out of the British. And it was only a couple units at that time, essentially what would become the Young Guard, which would then become the Old Guard later, which are the best of the best and the hardest trained. By this point, most all the French units could do that. So you had double line and then road column. The other one is line, and that's a firing line. That would be for the French, 3 to 4 men deep, and then as long, or 3 to 4 men deep but long. So they're all firing, and then square. Now in this, it's a divisional square. So each facing would roughly have a battalion on it. So you're thinking about 1,000 to 1,500 men. And the way that would work is it's 3 men. It's a 3 men deep line. The first rank kneels and basically places their musket on their thigh with a bayonet out. And the second rank kind of crouches down and fires at a crouch with their bayonet pushed right into their shoulder. And then the third rank fires from a completely standing position, but then after they fire, they will hold their gun. They'll flip it upside down and they'll hold their gun overhand or underhand above their shoulder, and they're creating a wall of bayonets. And so, really, if you've ever seen Braveheart, when the English cavalry charges and they hold up the stations.
Where's Crazy Mad in the chat?
Right, they hold up the stations. It's the same concept. Cavalry's main benefit against infantry is mass and momentum. And so if you can kill either their mass or their momentum, if you can kill their mass by just withering them with gunfire and lowering their number, they won't have as much effect. If you do that and have a method to lower their momentum, which is they just stop when they hit you, then there's nothing they can do. Because of the nature of the Mamluk cavalry being mostly sword-based, or they had a few lancers but nothing big. Lancers are a little bit different because lancers can come out and then they can reach in and spear people. But still, the issue is that you've got 2 ranks that are essentially always loading and firing out of that square formation on each face. So, and it's an every other man thing. If I just fired, the man to my right is now reloading while I hold my bayonet out. So no matter where the Mamelukes press and feel and probe on these squares, they're not getting anywhere, and they're just getting devastated by the cannon, by the constant musket fire, by the bayonets jabbing at them. And one of the key things you were taught as an infantryman is to take out the horse. If you could get a shot on a horse, you'd bayonet a horse and take it out, because now the rider's useless.
And so really quickly, all this, I just want to point out here for the chat, up on the screen, I've pulled up this painting, and you can actually see what Aldous was talking about with the cascading of muskets by line. And back then, you were also like the bayonet was a standard piece of equipment, and the bayonet would effectively turn your musket into a pike. And so bayonet like line formation drills and everything were like that. You would have like a cascading line of fire, and then when you're not firing, you have your bayonet out. Very similar to how like the hoplite phalanx would do things as a way to repel cavalry as well, because horses aren't going to charge directly into a spear. They have self-preservation. They will buck and they will turn before they go and charge in. But
well, and
anyway,
and here for perspective, your average soldier at this time is going to be like 5'4" ish on height, average. The average musket's 5 foot long, roughly, and then the bayonet's another 18 to 22 inches beyond that. So if you can picture 1,000 men, 1,000 bayonets in two rows, in 3 rows, at that long, sticking out, they're spears. It's no different than that Braveheart analogy. It's a porcupine of bayonets all the way around this, and it's just devastating. The Mamluks had never seen anything like this before, or if they had, it was in poorly trained, low drilled soldiers. They weren't used to anything that involved discipline and structure, and the French just devastated the hell out of them. And if you're asking, like, well, wait a minute, the artillery's at the corners, how do they protect themselves? Men would stand in front of the artillery. You'd have 2 to 3 rows of men doing the same thing. When the artillery was ready to fire, they would move. They would just retreat back beyond the gun. The gun would fire, and then they'd move right back in front of it. Because by the very nature of these guns, there's no recoil protection. So and they're on wheels. So you would never chock a gun in a square formation like this. You would let it roll back because inherently you're putting it back into safety. So the gun would fire, it would naturally roll back, and then the rest of the infantry would form up immediately in front of it. Now, the downside of this, and Desaix mentions this in his after-action report to Napoleon, and this is where, again, you see this. It's a constant school of learning. They're ever adapting. They're always adapting to the rules. This has never been done before. So in his after-action report, Desaix is talking about, he goes, one of the main problems with positioning the guns on the corners that we didn't anticipate was they're using a black powder. Black powder generates a lot of smoke. So they started having problems as the battle went on with the amount of smoke that was being generated at the corners. Now, what you're looking for in this, again, it's a divisional square. There's one battalion on each facing. The divisional commander is usually in the center trying to direct his runners and his messengers to each of the individual battalion commanders. And that's based off of, he bases where they're off of by where he sees the battalion flag. They started generating so much smoke that Desaix, sitting in the center of his square, couldn't see half of his battalion commanders. And so he was sending runners blind to just find them and let them know, how are we doing? Do we need anything? Do we have any problems? Is there a break? And that was a major issue. Now, you won't see this deployment exactly like this ever again, but where you do see the lessons learned from this are the attack on the bulwark at Borodino. The lessons learned here were applied at Borodino because they had the same issues with the lack of with the obstruction of view due to all the guns that the Russians had on the redoubt.
Did you cut out there?
No, I just coughed. I'm sorry.
No, you're good, man. You're allowed to do like normal bodily function stuff. It's all good.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I've made a note that I have permission.
Yes,
but if you want to put up the map again, there is one
which
small
one
thing.
do you want? Do you want the?
No, I just need to show one that shows where Bakili is.
Okay, give me a sec. Got you. He said, which one do we need?
Probably the other one. You can probably see it better. This is Grand Tactical.
Okay.
That's actually a map that was drawn after the battle. Again, because Napoleon brought over 400 scholars and scientists with him, artists, and because they're bringing culture. It's not just invasion; it's culture in their mind. So if you look right here, you can see Bakili, right by Desaix. That was a small little village that was on the kind of the
Bictil.
Yeah, Bictil. It was up on the hill, kind of just outside of town. The French sent about a company of sappers to take that, and there was some light fighting around that, but they took that without any too much trouble. And in this case, the Mamluks came through and rode through the area, but because it was a building, the French were just in the buildings. It kind of like if you've ever seen the movie like Rourke's Drift. They're in like the buildings, and the cavalry's moving around the buildings. They're just shooting out of the windows and bayoneting out the windows. They couldn't get anywhere, so that held, and that's kind of like I think there's a Sharps episode where the rifles are in a town facing the wolf episode where he's fighting the wolf.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, where he's fighting the cavalry and they're just in the buildings. Yeah,
Sharp's enemy.
It's the same. It's the same kind of concept. And
General Lou or Colonel Lou.
Right, and it's in these small actions that you get a lot of the cooler stories from. On the soldier level, because I mean, if you're just sitting in that square, you have no idea what's going on. There's smoke everywhere. There's dead Mamluks everywhere. It's just it's loud. There's explosions. There's blood. But if you're in one of these instances where they only sent like 100 to 200 men, there's a lot of personal accounts because there's a little bit. It's as close as you can get to like World War II combat almost. It's still company level, so they're still in line. It's not like modern warfare, but the men can see a lot more that's going on, and so there's a lot of there's a couple of little skirmishes that go on down by the main city of Mbare, but that siege, they broke through the walls pretty fast, and the limited resistance that was there was all infantry, and it was basically ad hoc militia, and they took the village without too much of a trouble. And like I said, within 24 hours of the battle, Napoleon's already in Cairo, which is just across the river. And the Mamluks burned all their ships. They went to the other side of the river. They burned all their ships so they couldn't be used by the French. Some of the French Navy did come down the river and started ferrying units across almost immediately. And but this is the high point, man. And I would probably say our next episode will be on the low point, and that happens 10 days after this.
Yeah. Time for old Nappy to get a little bit of a knockdown.
I'm not going to ruin it. I'm not going to say anything because, yeah.
We will get there next week.
Let's just say, as adept and revolutionary, no pun intended, as the French army has shown itself up to this point in the Egyptian invasion, the French Navy is not quite so adaptable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's even not necessarily a fair statement. They're up against fucking Horatio Nelson.
No, actually, in this instance, I will completely argue. Nelson did nothing brilliant. There was no good maneuver. Everything that went wrong next week that we're going to talk about is 150% on the French admiral.
Okay, well,
he did the biggest no you never do in 18th, 19th century naval warfare.
That's fair. I was trying to give the French a little bit of a benefit of the doubt there because
now when it comes to their navy, no, French military, yes, I will simp for an army when Napoleon's leading it because win after win they show themselves to be an exemplary fighting force. When it comes to their navy, Jesus, man, the Spanish kicked their ass.
Yeah. Well, the Spanish had like the best navy up until the British.
No. So, they had the largest navy.
That's fair. The British had even when the British had a smaller navy, they beat them at the War of Spanish Succession, use of privateers and everything. Yeah. So, I guess the last few minutes we'll catch up with the chat.
Yeah, I guess are there any? Does the chat have any questions?
Yeah, man. In fact, that's something that I want to start doing. Like, I know that the chat is mainly here to dick around, but like, one of the fun things about doing these streams, like even with When in Rome and even previous history streams I've done, is every now and again we'll get an actual like question from the chat, some like a curious, they're like, hey, what about what about this? And it's fun. So if anybody has any questions in the chat, please let us know. I know Dean, this one wasn't meant to be serious, but this is actually like a pretty cool thing. I think was asking why we stopped putting swords on the ends of guns. So like why we shifted away from the bayonet. And I mean,
we still have bayonets.
We do and we don't. Speaking as somebody who works for that department of the Army and knows what's going on for the Army of 2030, we do and we don't. Like they're still technically in the PEO soldier catalog, like they're still technically there, but none of the next generation weapon systems are going to be implementing them. Partially because those weapon systems are already pretty front heavy, and also because recent studies showcase that there is too much hesitancy in modern combatants to use a bayonet and stab somebody with it.
Can I tell you a fun story that has parallels to that?
Yeah.
So, Korean War, air-to-air victories towards the end were our dogfighting from fighter to fighter was at its absolute peak. But towards the end, they started realizing that no, with the development of the missile, we're not going to need guns anymore. And so by the development of the F4 Phantom, they actually took the gun completely off because the assumption is that all engagements from here on out are going to be over the horizon. You're going to either have radar lock or you're going to make light eye contact. You're going to missile lock, launch a missile, and then disengage. And what happened was the North Vietnamese pilots in Vietnam intentionally would go up close so that our F-4 pilots couldn't use their missiles. And then they were getting shot down at astronomical numbers. So they put a gun back in. I anticipate that you're going to see something regarding that with the bayonet. Because that's the history of military development. All studies show that it's going to be fine. And then it never is.
I can tell you right now. So, I mean, this isn't like a new thing. These weapon systems have been in development for about 3 years. And there's been a lot of publicity around them. But the XM7 and the XM250, neither of them have the little bayonet clip on them, and if they did, I don't know how you like you have to use a suppressor on that weapon. The new 6.8 round fires within a few decibels of permanent hearing loss, even with a set of ear pro, without suppressors. So like you need to have the suppressor on there because it's a suppressor and a shit blanking. But point is that like they're beasts. So I don't know if we'll be seeing a bayonet come back. The intent right now is there's not a bayonet, and they haven't even been doing bayonet training for at least since I've been in basic. When I was one of the last basic training cycles to go through the bayonet course.
That doesn't surprise me, but everything in military tactics is everything is cyclic, and the classic adaptation for everything is always just dig a trench. As you're seeing right now in Ukraine and Russia, they are essentially recreating 1918 Verdun with what they're doing on the front lines. There was some great video that came out of they dug an anti-tank trench. Like, you will be hard pressed to see an actual anti-tank trench since like 1940. It is just unreal. I take that back. There were some at Tobruk in 42. But it's just not something you see. And here we are in 2023, and they dug a miles-long anti-tank trench that's like 8 feet wide and 4 foot deep. And some jackwagon drove a Bradley into it, and they had it on video.
That's awesome. That's what you want. Yes.
But that's where we're headed. It's, the end-all solution is always dig a hole, and the minute you dig a hole, infantry
100%.
jump in it, and when infantry are in it, it always comes. Eventually, it always gets down to knife fighting. So.
Yeah, no, and that is more than fair, and I don't disagree with that. But I am just saying what the official posture is no more bayonets. And it's been that way for a hot minute. Like,
I'm sure. Yeah.
I went through basic. We did the bayonet course, and we got told that we were pretty much the last people that were going through it. And that was fun. We got to do like the pugil stick fighting, and then did the bayonet course, which was a good time. But like normally you have to do like a bayonet qual, and we technically did one, but it didn't count towards anybody's like pass or fail. Like, it was just for shits and giggles because we had it scheduled on the slate, but like by that point it had already been kind of made redundant. So we went and we did it because it was on our schedule, but it didn't really affect anything. And when we got to our units, none of us were like issued bayonets, even though the M4 has obviously the ability to equip one.
Right.
But,
well, and at this time period too in Napoleonics, I mentioned that with the one village, they sent some grenadiers in. Grenadiers actually did carry grenades. They were essentially like small little cannonballs that you lit a fuse on and then would throw. They were very limited in number and scope, but grenades did exist in this time. It was considered a specialty weapon, and the grenadiers carried them, and they were considered kind of a above average medium infantry, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, like they were also generally like bigger. Some of your bigger guys in the units as well.
It depends. The French usually put, if you were a taller guy, a stronger guy, then usually you were a sapper, and then usually you always carried it. You carried a musket and an axe, a shovel, or a pickaxe. By later in the Napoleonics,
or you were also a part of Napoleon's Imperial Guard, because
all the guard were very tall gentlemen and badasses in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the end of the Napoleonic era, almost every sapper just carried an axe, and there's some really cool stories back and forth of people like holding a door with an axe, swinging it at people and stuff, and it's just almost medieval combat level stuff when it gets down to man to man.
At the end of the day, we're talking about a period of time where the standard firearm fought with a well-trained unit was firing 3 rounds a minute, right? Like
that's the gauge of a good soldier.
Yes, indeed. Done any soldiering, have you? Um, but anyways, oh, I cannot wait till we get to the Peninsula Wars.
We have a ways to go, my friend.
I know, but anyways, the like 3 rounds at 3 rounds a minute, you're gonna get one shot off in close quarters, and if you don't hit, which muskets back in that day, you could be a trained soldier, and if you're getting bum rushed, you're not gonna hit the broadside of a barn. And so that it becomes melee combat. It becomes medieval fighting. It becomes, you know, you using that weapon as a club or, whatever. Like, yes, there's the bayonet, which you can use to stab and everything. But what happens if you have 5 or 6 guys coming at you? I'm not going to use the bayonet. I'm going to swing that bitch like a bat.
No, you use the bayonet, especially if you're in square, because you have to use the bayonet.
Yes, if you're in a square, but if you're a single guy and you're getting bum rushed by 3 or 4 people, I'm using that shit like a club. I'm going down like Davy Crockett.
I was gonna say Fess Parker all the way.
But yeah, man, it's one of these things where the Napoleonic era is really like the last period of where you're really having this kind of blend of modern warfare and medieval warfare.
To a degree, I think if you read any of the letters from many of the soldiers that were involved in like the siege of Vicksburg, they would probably disagree. Yeah, but
probably, but
it's this era for sure. It's
at
the
least
industrial
in continental
area.
Europe.
It's certainly for the next
Americas.
80 years. It's the phase out, and with each conflict, it grows less and less.
That's what Aldous was saying as well. He said Civil War II, and I was like, yeah, no, like Civil War, absolutely, because they're using Napoleonic tactics, and it's at the
no, they're not using Napoleonic. Well, the one great instance of Napoleonic tactics is Pickett's Charge. Pickett's Charge is a very Napoleonic maneuver.
Yeah.
With a mass multi-divisional advance across open ground.
Most of the officers have been trained in Napoleonic strategy.
They have, but in the case of the Civil War, any commander that had any experience in the Mexican-American War would have already adapted their command and control to the evolutions of what combat had shown based off of that. I mean, rail drastically changes it. That's really you start seeing the effects of rail with the logistics of movement. And we're running late, so I'm not going to go too long here.
No, you're good, man.
The logistics of rail really start changing things in the American Civil War, and
we everybody
from continental Europe had observers on both sides, because anytime there's a conflict, every world power, even today, if you don't think that the U.S. has boots on the ground in Ukraine checking stuff out, you're a fool. We got people over there looking at it, because that's how war evolves, and that's how you upgrade things. That's how you adapt, is you see how other people are fighting, and then you adjust accordingly. But in this case, the British saw the effects of rail and were intrigued. The Prussians saw the advent and application of rail, and their pants got really, really tight. And less than 15 years after the American Civil War, they're in Paris in the Franco-Prussian War. And that blew everybody away in Europe at how fast the Prussians could move, because they fully adapted everything that you saw in the American Civil War. And the American Civil War, they adapted what they saw in the Mexican-American War. And in the Mexican-American War, they were citing directly what Napoleon learned and the tactics. And that's why you don't see massed infantry advances until Pickett's Charge. It's just it's not done, for the very reason of what happened at Pickett's Charge. It's just a massive waste of manpower.
Yeah, no, 100%. But like the point is, like, we are at the cusp of approaching modern warfare, and war will not be fought like it is during Napoleon's time. At least not well. Again.
No, and it's constantly evolving at this time too. I mean, there are aspects of maneuvers that were done here that like I said, you'll never see. It's never seen again. Divisional square is not seen again. Battalion square is seen time and time again. Battalion square was used very effectively at Waterloo by the British, but you don't see this level of divisional square. You'll see this level of divisional command and control. This is really its first shining moment. And you're going to see this more and more. You see it beautifully at Austerlitz, and you really see it at Borodino. Which I can't wait until we get to Borodino.
Dude,
Man.
Austerlitz
Borodino's
and Borodino are going to be blasts to talk about. They're great fucking battles.
Dean, free history classes disguised as a show is genius. Yes, you can tell by our viewership.
It was like, look, man, we're having a good old time.
Hey man, anytime I can wax poetic about this, I love the military tactics and the developments here. I love what you've got going on. You've got over 1,000 years of European history where men were not free. Men always were subject to the crown. Until now.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, English Civil War, sure, they're still subject to Cromwell. But now,
and that
at
only
this period,
lasts for like a decade and a half.
Right. This is something that's totally different. These men are free. And they're fighting for something they believe in. And it's beautiful. And then what happens is epic. You just don't, and really this is, we talked a little bit about France's fleet, or Spain's fleet, and Spain's high watermark was with the conquest of the New World and the silver fleets and all of that. Spain's never achieved that level of global prominence again. Portugal to the same degree. The Dutch to the same round with trade. They never experienced that again. They're on the downside. The British in our own lifetimes, with the annexation of Hong Kong to China, they're on the downswing of their empire. If you're in your 60s or 70s, you've seen them give up India, Canada. Their empire is shrinking. If you're living now, you're seeing America's empire shrinking. Our relevance is shrinking. Yeah. It's really wild to talk about a period of time when a country like France, which you don't think of as a world power, went from not a world power to controlling the vast majority of Europe in under 15 years.
Yeah. Well, and the beautiful, the crazier part about it is, for the majority of that time in continental Europe, outside of like the royal families and everything, Napoleon is a fucking hero.
Yeah, everybody loves him right up until Moscow.
He is considered to be the liberator of the Ancien regime in everywhere he goes. His establishment of the German republics becomes the basis by which Germany will become its own nation.
Yeah, well, Bismarck finished what he started, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With
a lot of help from the Prussians.
Yes, but like the point is, though, is that Napoleon sets all this stuff in motion, and really, I would say, Russia and the Peninsula campaign were really the things that turned the tide against him.
I would argue, we've had this argument before. It was Russia. Russia devastated him because it was the first time he was shown to be fallible. You can argue the Peninsular Campaign, but
I think that the Peninsula Campaign wasn't the same military thing, but from the propaganda angle of going from the way that the British were able to weaponize the Peninsula Campaign and make him.
You're looking at that through the way the history books present it, which is any history book is always going to present any British victory as a grand accomplishment. I mean, for the love of God, go online and read what it says about the Falklands War. You would think that Britain faced some like huge world power. They got a bloody nose or five from Argentina. Of all yeah, dude, no, that's not a major victory. You accomplished something on the Iberian Peninsula. The last time the Iberian Peninsula was relevant in any military realm, other than for Franco, was El Cid.
Yeah.
Strategically, it's not important.
Well, I mean, I would say that Hannibal begs to disagree, but that's antiquities.
That was before El Cid.
Yeah, I know.
So I was moving backwards, Mike. So yes, you could say yes. Hannibal, but in between then, where we're talking, and Hannibal is El Cid.
Yes.
Which I always love that map. You ever seen that map where like all of Spain is red except for this little tiny corner? And it's, one more saying to the other, like, should we take it? Like, no, what's the worst that can happen?
And then it's El Cid happens.
Right. And then 5 years later, all of Spain is freed.
Oh man, freaking! Oh,
Right.
I don't know
And
why, but
Snuggie,
that
yes,
reminded me of the
I love I love the Falklands War because only the British would put fucking magnesium in the hulls of ships. Hey, what happens when they catch on fire? Well, we'll just put you should use water to put it out. Well, but we put magnesium in the hull so they'd be lighter.
Oh goodness, but like, yeah, man, I do really enjoy doing these shows with you.
I don't know why.
It's a blast, man. I love.
No, I do. I have a great time. I'm always happy that we get more than 2 viewers. So
yeah, well, and we
appreciate
actually
everybody that stopped by.
I should let you know all this. We actually get like solid amounts on the replays. Like it's nothing to be like, oh yeah, we're kicking ass, but like we get around like 20 replay watches throughout like the week after we do a show.
There you go.
So like people do actually come and watch the Vivre L'Empreur and When in Rome's. They might not be able to make it to our live things because there are other streams going on, and or it's a weekday and it's past 10 p.m. and some people like to sleep. And to those people, I say that's weakness.
Yes. The human body only needs 4 hours of sleep a night.
But point is that it's always a blast doing this with you. I greatly appreciate having you on as a co-host.
Always,
tonight was fantastic. This marks the end of the episode on the Battle of the Pyramids. We hope that you guys have enjoyed in the chat. Next week, well, I think we've moved the show to Monday now. Aldous keeps playing hopscotch with the days to keep everybody on their toes, myself included, because you can never be complacent when it comes to Napoleonic warfare.
Absolutely.
So anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really look forward to talking with you next week and wrap up the Napoleon's campaign in Egypt so that we can move on to the coronation.
Bigger and better things. Well, we've got Battle of the Nile.
Yeah.
We've got Syria.
But then after
then we
the
can
Egypt,
spend like half an episode on the rest of Egypt, and then everything that came after that, and then the coronation's coming up. So
yeah, because like I'd say that we've got like 2, maybe 3 episodes away till coronation.
Yeah, for sure. And at the current rate, that will be in December. So
yes, of course. Oh man.
Well, hey, if you enjoyed tonight's episode where we spoke about all things France, then you should also enjoy Michael Oden's Judex, which is based on a 1916 French silent film. In fact, did you see the question? I asked Mr. Jim Steranko if he had ever was familiar with Judex, and he said that he went and saw it with one of the authors of the original Shadow books.
That is so cool, by the way. Like, I geeked out looking at that. I I wanted to find out if there was a way to get in touch with Jim Steranko about potentially doing a Judex cover. That would be like the dream come true.
The answer is no.
That's fair.
Trust me, Phil and I have asked twice in the last 2 years. So both times we've seen him. Are you doing commissions? No. Okay.
It's like, oh, thank you, sir. But yeah, so this is Judex. We have fully funded. We are nearing our next stretch goal at 7,500, and we are 10 backers away from 100. It's a beautiful book drawn by Fabrizio Ugolini, who makes the art feel like a black and white film. We have revitalized this French silent film character into this defender of Parisian culture during the Nazi occupation, and it's going to be a blast. I've written the story and the first treatment of the script, and Neff has come in with an iron fist and has hammered out any of the imperfections. And I really think that together we've done something special. And I hope that you guys give it a look, and If any support that we can get is appreciated, whether that's a backing or a share of a link. We appreciate it all. So thank you guys so much for joining us here this evening. I'm Michael Oden, creator and founder of Nine Realms Publishing. This is my co-host Aldous.
I'm just a crudge who reads too much. That's pretty much all it is.
And per usual, Corey Barton catches us at the dead end of the stream. Thank you, everybody. That's our cue. Have a good night.
But that makes